For years, that cat lived inside the same house without ever really being a part of it. He passed through the corners, slept on the cold floor, ate what was left when there was anything left. No one hated him. That would have been easier. They simply pretended he did not exist. Meanwhile, everyone else had names, affection, laps, and goodbyes. Until the day the house became empty. One by one, everyone left. Voices ceased. Doors closed. Only silence remained. And the cat that no one wanted. It was then, when there was no one left, that they realized too late who had always been there the whole time. For a long time, no one realized how that house truly functioned. There was laughter, hurried footsteps, slamming doors, loud conversations, and trivial arguments. Everything seemed normal to the eyes of those passing by on the street, but inside those walls, there was a silent hierarchy. Some were seen, heard, remembered. Others merely occupied space. The cat was part of this second group. He was not openly mistreated. He was not beaten. He was not kicked out. His pain came from something deeper. Indifference. He learned to move without making noise, to wait without creating expectation, to accept that touch never came. He grew up like this, invisible, while life went on around him as if he were just a forgotten object in a corner of the room. As the years went by, things began to change in an almost imperceptible way. People became more tired, more absent, more preoccupied with their own problems. The house, once full, began to have voids that no one talked about, a closed bedroom, a chair that was never pulled out again, a name that stopped being spoken. The cat felt every absence before everyone else because he was an expert in noticing what was missing. He observed schedules being lost, habits being broken, bonds being dissolved. Even so, no one looked at him. No one noticed that, while everything was slowly collapsing, there was a constant presence that never failed. This story is not just about an ignored cat. It is about what happens when we confuse presence with value, about how we only give importance to what makes noise, to what demands attention, to what threatens to leave, and, mainly, about the regret that is born when we understand too late who remained when everyone else chose to depart. If this story has already started to touch you in some way, leave your like now. It helps the channel a lot to continue. Subscribe as well. I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every single subscription truly makes a difference. And tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching this story? The house was never truly silent while there were people in it. Even on the calmest days, there was always some sound, the creaking of the floorboards, the distant slamming of a door, the echo of a conversation in another room. For the cat, these noises were like emotional territory markers. He learned where he could lie down, without being in the way, where to walk without being noticed, and at what times it was best to simply disappear. Since he was a kitten, he understood that his presence was neither welcome nor unwanted. It was irrelevant. He grew up watching feet pass by his side without ever stopping, hands that petted other animals but avoided him, voices that called names that would never be his. He had a fixed spot behind the sofa, where the sun hit for only a few minutes in the late afternoon. There, he would curl up and watch the family gathered together. The dog received excitement, praise, and special food. The children vied for attention, and the adults complained about the exhaustion of the day. The cat watched everything with attentive eyes, learning each person's moods, anticipating footsteps, predicting outbursts of anger or laughter. No one noticed, but he knew that house better than anyone else. He knew when someone was sad by the way they walked, when an argument was approaching by the heavy silence before the words. Still he remained invisible. Over time he stopped meowing. Not for lack of voice, but because he understood there was no answer. He learned to eat quickly when the dish appeared on the floor, without drawing attention. He learned to sleep at odd hours, so as not to cross paths with anyone. The absence of affection shaped his gestures, making him cautious, almost transparent. If someone accidentally tripped over him, they apologized to the air, without even looking down. The cat would move away, not out of fear, but out of habit. Constant indifference was a language he spoke fluently. The years passed without anyone noticing the change in his body. He grew thinner, his fur lost its shine, and his eyes carried a quiet melancholy. There were no visible illnesses, no open wounds. It was a slow, emotional deterioration, hard to pin down. When visitors commented on the dog or the children, no one remembered to mention the cat. Sometimes someone would be surprised to see him appear out of nowhere, as if he were a forgotten detail of the house. He observed these moments with a resigned calm, like someone who has already accepted their role. The routine began to unravel when the goodbyes became more frequent. First, one of the children left home. Boxes, hugs, promises to visit. The cat followed it all from a distance, smelling the change even before it happened. Then came the late-night arguments, the doors shut with force, the days when someone slept out. Each absence left a trail that only he seemed to notice. The dog still received attention, still was taken for walks. The cat continued to be there, invisible, absorbing the weight of the transformations. There was a day when he tried to approach. It wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. He chose a moment of fragility when the house was quiet and one of the people was crying, sitting on the sofa. He climbed up slowly, placed his paw carefully, and leaned his warm body against that human sadness. For an instant he believed that perhaps he would be seen. The hand came down, not to pet him but to push him away with automatic gentleness, like someone removing an object out of place. There was no anger, only distraction. The cat climbed down from the sofa without making a sound, taking with him the confirmation of something he already knew. From that day on, he began to hide more. He slept in high or cramped places where no one would look. He watched through the cracks of the doors, always attentive, always present. When the dog got sick, everyone mobilized. The vet, care, tears. The cat watched that with a strange mixture of understanding and distance. There was no envy, only a deep acceptance that there were beings who deserved to be saved, and others who existed only to fill the space. Then, the house began to empty for real, not abruptly, but like a candle slowly going out. One adult left with suitcases and didn't return. The dog was taken along. Furniture, echoes, and the cat remained. He began to roam the empty rooms, sniffing out the past. Each closed bedroom was a frozen memory. Each window without a curtain let in a new cold. For the first time, silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was abandonment. Even so, no one remembered him. When the last person left, leaving the key on the table, there was no goodbye. The door closed, the car departed, and the cat stayed. He didn't meow. He didn't run after them. He just sat in the middle of the empty living room, looking at the door that would no longer open. The air was heavy, loaded with something that wouldn't return. For the first time in years, he didn't need to hide. There was no one left to disappear from. Time passed differently in that silence. The hours dragged, the days blurred. The cat explored the house calmly, lying in places he never dared before. He climbed onto the sofa, entered the bedrooms, slept on the bed that was never his. It wasn't a gesture of victory, but of survival. He continued waiting for food that didn't come, footsteps that didn't return. Still, he remained, because staying was the only thing he ever knew how to do. It was in that emptiness that something changed inside him, not a naive hope, but a hard clarity. Everyone had gone. Everyone except him. The cat that no one wanted was now the sole guardian of that story. He didn't understand human promises or bonds, but he understood permanence. And while the forgotten house breathed its last breath of life, he remained there, silent as he always had been, waiting not for recognition, but because he had never learned how to leave. The silence of the abandoned house was not empty. It had weight, smell, and temperature. The cat began to recognize it as a new kind of presence, more constant than any human had ever been. During the day, light entered through the curtainless windows, drawing long shadows on the floor. At night, the cold seeped in through the corners, forcing him to seek shelter where he once didn't dare. He no longer hid for fear of being ignored, but out of survival instinct. The house, far too large for a single living being, seemed to shrink around him. In the first few days, the cat still waited. He would sit near the door at certain times, exactly as he used to when someone was expected to arrive, his body upright, ears alert, eyes fixed on the lock. Every distant sound made his heart race. A car passing, a gate slamming in the distance. Nothing. The expectations slowly dissolved, but he persisted, as if repetition could bring back something that had already left. When hunger pinched, he scavenged the kitchen, finding only dry scraps and the stale scent of food that no longer existed. As the days passed, waiting gave way to a strange routine. The cat began to roam the house like a solitary watchman. He climbed onto the furniture, lay in other people's beds, and rubbed his body against objects that still carried the scent of people. Each room held a memory he didn't fully understand, but could feel. The bedroom where someone had slept crying, the living room where arguments echoed, the kitchen where laughter had been common. He walked through it all in silence, as if his presence were the only thing keeping that place alive. Hunger became more aggressive. His body, already thin, began to respond slowly. His movements became cautious and calculated. The cat began to scour the house in search of anything he could eat. Sometimes he found insects, sometimes just dust. Still he persisted. There was no noisy despair, only a quiet determination. He had learned from an early age that surviving meant not drawing attention. Even now, when there was no one to hear him, he remained faithful to that cruel lesson. On some nights, he slept on the sofa, staring at the dark ceiling. On others, he preferred the cold floor of the hallway, where he once went unnoticed. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by imaginary noises, by blurred memories of footsteps that no longer existed. The cat dreamed of voices, of hands that never touched him, of a vague sense of belonging that was never real. Upon waking, the house returned only silence and abandonment. Time lost its meaning. Days and nights blurred together. Sunlight was no longer a sign of activity, and darkness brought no rest. The cat began to notice changes in his own body. His paws hurt more. His jump was no longer as precise. His breathing became heavy after small efforts. Still, he continued, because staying was all he knew, because leaving required a courage he never needed to develop. No one had ever expected him to go. Then, something unexpected happened. On a cold morning, a different noise cut through the silence. It wasn't a distant car or the wind. It was something close, a metallic sound, followed by muffled voices outside. The cat ran to the window, watching cautiously. Strangers were there. They were not the ones he had known. They moved quickly, spoke loudly, and pointed at the house. The cat's heart raced, not with hope, but with alarm. Change always meant danger. The voices approached. The door was forced open, breaking the silence he had learned to inhabit. The cat immediately cringed, seeking shelter in the furthest place he could find. Not because he had done anything wrong, but because his body reacted on its own. That was the automatic response of someone who spent a lifetime learning not to be seen. He watched from the shadows, feeling the scent of strangers invade the space he now considered his own. The new visitors walked through the house, commenting on the abandonment, the dirt, and the things left behind. They spoke as if nothing there had any importance, as if that house were just a problem to be solved. At no point did they mention the cat. He was there, breathing, alive, but once again invisible. The human presence had returned, and with it, the old feeling of non-existence. When they left, leaving the door ajar, the cat remained motionless for a long time. Something inside him had contracted. The house was no longer safe. The silence, which was once familiar, had now become threatening. For the first time, he felt something close to true fear. Not the fear of being ignored, but the fear of disappearing for good. Still, he did not leave. He stayed, because staying had always been his answer to everything. That night, a storm hit hard. Water entered through the open door, wetting the floor, soaking the air. The cat huddled in a high corner, watching the house turn into something hostile. The cold pierced his bones, his body trembled. Even so, he resisted, not out of hope, but out of habit. Survival, for him, was never a conscious choice. It was just what happened when no one else cared anymore. And while the rain punished the empty house, something began to form silently. An invisible limit was being reached. The cat didn't know it yet, but he was approaching a point of no return. Everything he had endured until then, the indifference, the abandonment, the silence, was about to take its toll. And when it did, no one could say there were no signs. They were always there, just like the cat. The storm lasted longer than expected. The sound of rain beating on the roof mixed with the wind that swept through the house without resistance, making doors slam and objects fall on their own. For the cat, that chaos was not just noise, it was a warning. He felt in his body that something was wrong. It wasn't just cold or hunger. There was a strange pressure in the air, a sense of threat he couldn't name, but recognized instinctively. When the early hours of morning arrived, the house was already partially flooded. Water advanced slowly across the floor, forming icy puddles. The cat stayed at the highest point he could find, atop an old cupboard in the kitchen. From there, he watched the water rise, bringing with it the smell of mold, rust, and abandonment. Every movement required more effort. His body, already weakened by days without proper food, reacted slowly. Still, he remained alert. Survival had always demanded constant attention. Then the first sign of the irreversible event appeared. A sharp crack echoed through the house, coming from somewhere above. The cat raised his head immediately, eyes wide. Another crack, then a long creak, as if the house were complaining about its own structure. The roof, old and unmaintained, began to give way, under the weight of the accumulated water. The cat didn't understand construction, but he understood danger. His body stiffened, ready to flee, though he didn't know exactly where to. A piece of the ceiling fell to the living room floor, scattering dust and wood fragments. The noise was loud, terrifying. The cat recoiled instinctively, almost slipping off the cupboard. His heart raced. The house, which before was merely empty, was now becoming tangibly hostile. He had to get out. For the first time in years, the idea of leaving arose not as abandonment, but as an urgent necessity. Getting down from the cupboard was difficult. His back legs failed for a moment, betraying his accumulated exhaustion. Upon touching the wet floor, the cold pierced through his body like a blade. Still, he moved forward. Every step was calculated. The sound of the rain masked his movements, but that no longer mattered. There was no one to hear. No one to be bothered, only the urgency to stay alive. He headed toward the open door, the same one that had been left that way by the strangers earlier. The wind pushed the rain inside, turning the exit into something threatening. Outside, the night was dark, illuminated only by occasional lightning. The cat stopped for an instant, observing the unknown. All his life he had learned to remain. Now, he needed to go. The contradiction was cruel. Before he could gather his courage, a louder crash shook the house. Part of the kitchen roof collapsed completely, sending a heavy beam plummeting near where he had been standing seconds before. The impact made the floor tremble. The cat recoiled in fear, slipping and hitting his body against the wall. A sharp pain shot through his side. He let out a low sound, almost a moan, something he rarely did. There was no one to hear. Still, the pain was real. With difficulty, he stood up. His breathing was short. Each breath seemed to require more effort than the last. Even wounded, instinct spoke louder. He ran toward the door, ignoring the pain spreading through his body. Upon reaching the exit, he was hit directly by the cold rain. The thermal shock made him hesitate, but there was no alternative. Behind him, the house continued to slowly crumble. Outside, the ground was soaked and slippery. The cat tried to orient himself, but weakness made everything harder. He advanced a few meters before falling again, this time into the cold mud. His body trembled uncontrollably. The rain seemed endless. With every flash of lightning, he briefly saw the silhouette of the house, the place where he had spent his entire life being ignored and which was now evicting him without ceremony. It was there, lying in the mud, that something inside him began to give way. Not just physically, but emotionally. The silent struggle that had sustained his existence for so many years was reaching its limit. He tried to get up once more, but his legs failed. The world spun. Sounds became distant, muffled by the intense rain. For the first time, the cat could not continue. Hours passed without him noticing. The storm gradually subsided, but the cold remained. The cat's body was motionless, only his chest rising and falling irregularly. Life persisted, even when everything around seemed to conspire against it. There were no witnesses, there was no help, just a forgotten being fighting alone not to disappear completely. When dawn finally arrived, it brought a grey, weak light, almost heatless. The rain had ceased, leaving behind a scene of silent destruction. The house was partially destroyed, the grounds were marked by water and mud, and there, near the door, the cat remained fallen, breathing with difficulty. Anyone passing by could mistake him for just more debris from the abandonment, but he was still alive. It was in this fragile moment, between life and something very close to the end, that fate began to move in an unexpected way. Not as a gesture of immediate kindness, but as an inevitable consequence of everything that had been ignored until then. The irreversible event had not ended with the collapse of the roof. It was only beginning to show its true consequences. The day advanced slowly, as if the world were hesitating before moving forward. The grey morning light revealed the storm's damage with ruthless clarity. Broken tiles, exposed wood, cracked windows. The house that once merely looked abandoned now showed clear signs of collapse. To anyone looking from the outside, it was just another forgotten property. To the cat, it was the definitive end of the only territory he had ever known. He remained motionless for a long time, his body still lying in the cold mud. Every breath was short and irregular, as if the air had become too heavy to enter his lungs. The pain in his side spread, making any movement a difficult decision. Still, something inside him refused to fade out. It wasn't hope nor expectation of help. It was just resistance, a silent stubbornness that had sustained his existence from the very beginning. When he finally managed to move his head, his eyes found the house for the last time. There was no resentment there, only a tired acceptance. He didn't expect anyone to return. He didn't expect to be noticed. He just needed to keep breathing. With an effort, he dragged his body a few centimeters, seeking a less soaked area. Each small advance required extreme concentration. The world seemed distant, as if it were being observed through a thick layer of glass. It was in this state that human footsteps emerged again, different from the previous ones, slower, more careful. The cat did not react immediately. Human sounds had lost their meaning to him, but the scent was new, mixed with something familiar, concern. A shadow was projected onto the muddy ground, interrupting the weak sunlight. Someone was there, looking down. The woman stopped when she saw the small body stretched out near the door. For a moment, she thought it was too late. The motionless posture, the dirty fur, the almost imperceptible breathing. She knelt down slowly without saying anything. She didn't want to startle something that might not even be conscious. When she reached out her hand, she hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect for the fragility before her. It was then that she noticed the slight movement of the chest. The cat was still alive. The touch was soft, almost non-existent, just enough to confirm reality. The cat reacted with a minimal reflex, an almost imperceptible tremor. That was enough. The woman called for help, her voice filled with contained urgency. Other people approached, watching the scene with expressions of surprise and discomfort. Some recognized the cat vaguely. "He had been here for years," someone commented, as if that explained everything and at the same time explained nothing at all. While they discussed what to do, the cat remained there, oblivious to the words. The world spun slowly around him. He felt the warmth of the hands that wrapped around him, something he had never experienced in that way. He didn't fight, not because he trusted them, but because he had no strength to resist. He was wrapped in a dry cloth, taken away from the mud, the cold, and the ground that had rejected him. For the first time, someone was carrying him not out of obligation, but out of care. The trip to the car was short, but to the cat, it seemed endless. Every bump awakened a new pain. Still, there was something different about that experience. The constant heat, the low sound of the human voice trying to calm him, the continuous movement towards somewhere unknown. He didn't understand what was happening, but his body reacted differently. His breathing, though still difficult, began to stabilize slightly. On the way, the woman spoke about the house, about the abandonment, about how no one seemed to have noticed the cat for all those years. Her words carried indignation, but also guilt. Not personal. Guilt, but collective. As if, at that moment, she were representing everyone who had passed by there without looking down. The cat heard only the tone, not the content. For him, the most important thing was that the pain did not increase. At the place where he was taken, bright lights and strange smells took over his senses. Different hands touched him, now more firmly, examining his body. He tried to move, but was contained with care. There was no aggression, only urgency. Voices overlapped, quick words, decisions being made. The cat closed his eyes, exhausted. He didn't know if that was salvation or just one more change before the end. Meanwhile, outside, the abandoned house began to attract attention. Neighbors approached, commenting on the state of the property, the storm, and the danger it represented. Someone mentioned the cat. "He was always there," they said. "He never caused any trouble." The phrase fell heavy in the air. He never caused any trouble. Perhaps that had been the problem from the start. The news spread quickly, not in a grand way, but enough to awaken curiosity and discomfort. How had no one noticed before? How could a living being exist for so long without being truly seen? Questions arose too late. The cat, now lying on a warm surface, struggled silently to remain conscious. His body was weak, but it still resisted. It was there, in that unknown space, surrounded by strangers who finally saw him, that the turn began to take shape. Not as an immediate happy ending, but as an inevitable confrontation with everything that had been ignored. The cat that no one wanted was now at the center of a story that could no longer be avoided. And for the first time, the silence around him did not mean abandonment. It meant contained attention, expectation, and the hard possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, it was not too late. Time passed in a strange way in that new place. For the cat, there were no clear days or defined nights, only cycles of light and darkness interrupted by soft voices and careful hands. His body, exhausted after so many years of silent neglect, reacted slowly to the care. There was pain, there was weakness. There were moments when consciousness seemed to slip away. Even so, something persisted. It was not hope in the human sense. It was simply the refusal to disappear after having been seen, finally, even if late. The exams revealed what no one wanted to see for years: prolonged malnutrition, an ancient, untreated infection, injuries that did not come from direct violence, but from continuous abandonment, the kind of suffering that leaves no obvious marks, but corrodes from within. The professionals spoke with care, but their looks betrayed indignation. The unspoken question hung in the air: how did a living being manage to survive like this for so many years without anyone noticing? While the cat struggled, outside, the story began to spread. Neighbors recognized the house. They vaguely remembered the animal that was always there, quiet, invisible. People commented on how he never bothered anyone. The phrase was repeated, now loaded with shame: never bothered anyone, never asked, never demanded. Therefore, he was ignored. The weight of this realization began to fall on everyone, like a collective guilt, difficult to bear. Some of those who had lived in the house learned of what happened. The reactions were varied: surprise, denial, silence. One of them went so far as to say that they thought the cat fended for himself. Another commented that they always thought someone took care of him. No one took responsibility. And in that void of excuses, the truth imposed itself with brutality. Everyone had left, but he stayed. He stayed when no one else wanted to stay. He stayed without being chosen. The cat, oblivious to these conversations, faced his own battle. There was a critical moment when the care intensified. His breathing became unstable. His body, fragile, seemed ready to give. The hands around him moved with controlled urgency. There were no promises, only attempts. For the first time in his life, someone was fighting for him, not because he was special, beautiful, or useful, but because he existed. When the worst passed, there was no exaggerated celebration, just a silent relief. The cat opened his eyes slowly, finding faces observing him with genuine attention. He did not purr. He did not approach. He did not demonstrate gratitude in the way they expected. He just breathed, and that was enough. His presence, now recognized, carried a weight that no one could ignore anymore. The following days were of slow recovery. His body grew stronger little by little, but something in him remained different. He accepted the care, but kept his distance. He did not seek laps. He did not meow, asking for attention. Years of invisibility are not erased from one moment to the next. The cat did not hate humans. Neither did he trust them. He had simply learned that remaining did not guarantee being seen. When he was finally discharged, he did not return to the abandoned house. That part of the story had ended. A new place awaited him, with people willing to respect his boundaries. Still, he carried with him everything he lived through, not as an open wound, but as a silent memory. He was living proof that presence is not synonymous with value, and that regret usually arrives when there is no longer a way to erase the past. Before moving to the closing, I leave an important request here. If you have reached this point in the story, leave your like now. Subscribe to the channel. I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription makes an enormous difference. And tell me in the comments, would you have noticed this cat before everyone else went away? Some stories do not talk about great gestures or perfect endings. They talk about what we ignore while we are too busy looking at ourselves. This cat never asked for much. He never demanded attention. He never caused any trouble, and perhaps for that reason he was forgotten. He remained when everyone left, not out of romantic loyalty, but because he never had any other choice. This story confronts us with an uncomfortable question. How many silent presences pass through our lives without us noticing? How many times do we mistake the absence of noise for an absence of value? The cat survived not because he was strong, but because he was resilient. And resilience many times is born of neglect, not love. There is no completely happy ending here. There is belated care, there is guilt, there is learning. The cat will move on, but he will never be the same. And perhaps that is the most honest part of all. Not every abandonment can be erased. Not every wound heals without leaving a mark. If this story made you think, feel, or feel unsettled, then it has fulfilled its role. May it serve as a reminder that remaining is also an act of courage, and that noticing someone before it is too late can change everything.